Hello, everyone. First of all, thank you for staying where you are and listening to me talk. This one should be quite an interesting one. You're probably wondering who I am. We've heard from the likes of Nissan, Renault, BlaBlaCar, but who are ustwo? Well, ustwo are a digital product studio, and we make apps and games, user experiences and services from a user-centered design approach. I'm talking specifically from the auto division. So I head up the auto division with some colleagues, and we look at the opportunities and challenges within the auto space, and we help a lot of car makers on things like the in-car HMI and their connected car services, as well as smart mobility and autonomous vehicles, which is what I'm here to talk to you today. So as the intro mentioned, that's ustwo also makes games. We made this quite popular game, Monument Valley. Has anyone played Monument Valley? Hands up who's played Monument Valley? Oh my God, that's a huge amount. Well, you might have seen the talk that Dan gave yesterday. So he is from ustwo Games. They make games. I am from ustwo Auto. We work on user experience, opportunities and challenges within and around the car. So what I'm going to talk to you about in the next 11 minutes, I'll start to be quick, is why a user-centered design approach is important when we are designing for driverless cars. Then I'll be talking about how do we actually find what people want. This technology doesn't exist yet, or at least it's not readily available. How do we test how people behave alongside this technology? Then I'll be talking about what are these user needs. I'll give you some specific examples over the year's worth of research that we've been doing, and then I'm going to talk about how you can put all that into practice. So I'll show you a bit of a sneak peek of a special project that we've been working on over the past year. So I'll start with why is a user-centered design approach important when it comes to specifically with driverless cars? Well, there's a lot of talk out there about the technical feasibilities, legalities. That conversation is going well, and the work is going on incredible. So the technology is covered. What we're interested in is the human side of things. Will people adopt these things, and how can we ensure that the adoption is as smooth as it needs to be? And we believe that autonomy should be for the person, not for the technology. You haven't won the race when your car is level 5 autonomy. That doesn't matter if the people aren't using it. So as the driver transcends into the passenger, they might have a different experience with the car. It's less about driving and it's more about the experience of the journey. And the user experience therefore becomes incredibly important. So original equipment manufacturers, or the OEMs, might find themselves becoming the original experience manufacturers. And that's important because people will be entering these vehicles less so about the drive and more about the experience. So what is an example of user-centered design in action? So here is some autonomous vehicle concepts. These are from people that we really admire. And what you'll notice here is that none of them have wing mirrors or side mirrors. Presumably the reason there being that there's no driver. There's no driver to look into them. It makes the car, sort of stylistically pleasing, and it also has some aerodynamic benefits. But from the research that we've been doing over the past year, what we found is that a lot of people, including the vision impaired and the blind, use these wing mirrors to orientate themselves around the vehicle. So, for example, they'll feel on one side that there's a plastic and on the other side that there's a glass texture. With that information, that they know which way the car is pointing, where the door is, and they can enter the vehicle. So when you remove that, and don't forget that there's no driver anymore either to help them in, there's a risk that the vision impaired are discriminated against and whatnot, not even able to enter and use this technology. So that's one example of how not taking a user-centered design approach can create problems. So to that question, why is a user-centered design approach important? Because user needs are a major challenge and opportunity for driverless cars. without a user-centered design approach, we risk creating a system that won't be adopted by people. And that's a serious problem. So yes, it's technically feasible, but we need people to get along with the technology and use it. So how do we find what people really want and need from this technology? You know, how did we get to that insight earlier about the wing mirrors? Well, there's a number of things that we do, and it depends on the questions that we're asking. So we might interview the elderly or a Tesla driver. We might ask kids to draw their visions of the future. We've been asking taxi drivers about how they feel about potentially losing their jobs. That's me. And we also prototype a lot. We do a lot of VR prototyping, a lot of augmented reality. And a part of that as well is dreaming and imagining. You know, the internal combustion engine might be gone, and we've just got the batteries now, and the steering wheel and the pedals are gone. We can start from scratch. These vehicles could be almost anything, and it's part of our job is to dream and imagine what the technology, how it could be started again from scratch with a user-centered design approach. So that's a quick summary of how we get to the user-centered insights. But I'm just going to show you a short video now about some of the insights that we've got over the last year while we've been researching.
I like to be fully in control of my car. It keeps me alert. I don't want to be in the hands of robots.
To be honest, I don't know if I would enjoy it because I like to communicate.
Sometimes people just come in, they just want to chat. They want to tell you about all their problems. So they know they're never going to see you again. Sometimes they might even want our advice. And you're not going to get that from like a driverless car.
And it is because last week I was going to, by the cemetery, it was my husband's birthday last week, Wednesday. And the driver, he was lovely, lovely, lovely. And I said, thank you very much.
I might miss the occasional, hi, how are you? The occasional surprises that you get from really great conversations. That's it, you could program a driverless vehicle to engage in conversation. Actually, all trains in Singapore are driverless. When driverless trains started to proliferate, there was no question because everyone had sufficient trust in the government that it will be okay.
How many people want to get on them, you know? I mean, the technology's there to actually fly planes without a pilot. But who would get on the plane if they knew there wasn't a pilot there? Things like the DLR, people don't mind getting on it because it's on the rail.
Yeah, I think I've been on it twice, yeah. Is it driverless? Yeah. I won't go back on it.
Well, I have a feeling it's probably due to my age. You know, I think young people are so much into it. You know, they're born with it.
A bit weird, and I would probably always be looking forward.
Why?
Because you always have to have a driver, and if there's no driver, it'd be scary. I will never, ever, ever leave without my parents. I am too scared.
There's part of me that thinks if I go too far down this line and get to the point where I totally trust the car to drive itself, so I don't actually touch the steering wheel, am I overstepping a mark if an incident happens, and how would I feel about that from a family perspective if somebody got injured as a result of that?
I think I would feel more comfortable cycling and kind of living around autonomous vehicles. I think I don't inherently trust people's behaviour.
So there's the age-old question of trust there, but something that we found at the level of trust and the trust in what part of the system vary depending on the different kinds of people. So I'll give you a couple of quick examples of some specific insights that we've got during our year of research. So Darrett here, she lost her husband a few years ago. She also has mobility issues, so she's unable to leave the house so often, and most of her family is still in Jamaica. So what she's developed over the last couple of years is an isolation-based depression. She's incredibly lonely, and what she will do is she'll take a taxi somewhere when she doesn't need to, simply for that social interaction. And some neuroscientists make the bold claim that our need for social interaction is akin to our need for food and water. So when her coping mechanism is to use a car with the driver, and you take the driver away, we're making it even more difficult for people like Darrett to interact. But there is opportunities there as well. And another example is we carried out a social experiment using virtual reality, where we had people sit inside an autonomous vehicle, and we asked them about entering a location and have the vehicle navigate themselves. And what we found was that people found it incredibly disorientating and created anxiety that it wasn't them doing the navigation, or that they had no sight of the navigation. If you look at public transport today, there's already mitigators in place. For example, on a train, you'll have an announcement that says what the next stop is. You can also look out the window. On an aeroplane, similarly, you'll have a map with your location plotted there. There are ways of mitigating that orientation anxiety. And the difference there, though, is that these vehicles have a predefined route. They're going from A to B with these defined stops on it. When we're talking about shared vehicles, autonomous shared vehicles, where this route might be dynamically shifting as people get on and off, and you're having to make trade-offs between people coming on and your time, it'll be increasingly difficult to find orientation within this strange new route. And we found in our studies that it was causing anxiety with our passengers. What we found was that having huge windows, the larger the windows, the more they felt like they had a sense of orientation, and the less anxieties they had. So that was incredibly fascinating. So I explained there some insights, how we got there, why they're important. We had things, wing mirrors, removing wing mirrors causes issues for the vision impaired. Then we had Darrett, who needs some sort of onboard entity to communicate with. And then we were talking about the need for large windows. So how do we put these insights into practice? Well, us two have decided to create our own autonomous concept car, or concept autonomous car. Caveat is that we're not vehicle designers. I showed this to a OEM, and they picked on a particular part and said that would be physically impossible to manufacture. Just suspend disbelief for a second, and it's more about an illustration to show how our insights are put into action. So here's our concept car. Someone on Twitter called it a cable car, but it's not a cable car. It's called the ustwo, named after the kangaroo who carries its passengers safely around town. So what we have here is, there are wing mirrors, but they're scaled right down. So we can still have the aesthetic and the aerodynamic benefits of no wing mirrors, but we've left behind this physical remnant that the vision impaired that use to orientate themselves and get in the vehicle. So that's one example. We also have these large windows to help people with their sense of orientation. And on the inside as well, we have two different seating arrangements that's quite modular. So if there's 6 people, a family of 6 getting on board, there could be 2 benches either side to facilitate communication within the family. However, if there's 6 strangers on board, you would have a central, on the right there, a central bench area where people sit in the middle but face out. So it's all about creating the right social environment in the car, depending on the occupants and the passengers and their specific needs. And then one final thing, we found that people preferred the term sort of robot-driven car as opposed to driverless car. There's a nuance there. The difference is no driver for them raises alarm bells and panic, like how can there be no driver? But if you say it's an AI-driven car, they're a bit more comfortable with the fact that someone is driving the car, something is driving the car. So we have an avatar, an entity in the middle that's interacting with the passengers and giving feedback. We've also tested how it might work in a city landscape. So I'm just about out of time, but before I go, I just want to point out that my talk and a lot of the insights in our working practices are in a new book that we've just published. This is available for free as an ebook from our website, ustwo.com/humanizing autonomy, and it's a sort of a designer's handbook to how to take a user-centered design approach to driverless cars. So that's all from me. Thank you very much for listening. It's been a pleasure.